Hey everybody, welcome back to the How Did It Happen podcast. I'm your host, Mike Malatesta. For those of you who don't know me, I'm an entrepreneur who's founded and led 2 8-figure companies and acquired and integrated many businesses. At the moment, I'm invested in more than 75 companies, spanning the spectrum from startups to multi-generational businesses. I'm also an author, speaker, and lifetime learner. My mission is to study success in all areas of life. On this podcast, I explore stories of success in every episode and with every guest. What it means, why it's important, and of course, how it happens. Whether you're a student of success like I am, or you desire more success in your life, I want to expose you to the people, thinking, and actions that can help you achieve your goals. I want to be part of your education. I promise you that I will always respect the time you make to listen. My goal is to not waste 1 minute of it. My job is to help you become more personally and professionally successful. Every week, I will expose you to super successful people and ideas. With every guest, I will dig deep to tease out the most impactful information, the information that you care about, and the information that you deserve. I'm grateful to have you with me today, and I'm honored that you listen, subscribe, and share my episodes with your friends. That's what makes the show grow and impact more and more people. You can subscribe, follow, and learn more about me at MikeMalatesta.com. Today, I'm fulfilling my promise to you with another amazing success story. Scott Mautz is joining me on the podcast. This is Scott's second time on the podcast, and if you want to learn more about his story, you can listen to that podcast episode. It's number 107, and you can hear all about his remarkable journey right there. Now, Scott is a popular keynote speaker and author of the award-winning book, Find the Fire, Reignite Your Inspiration and Make Work Exciting Again, and Make It Matter, How Managers Can Motivate by Creating Meaning. Scott's also the CEO of Profound Performance, a keynote workshop and coaching company that helps you ignite profound performance in your organization. He's a former Procter Gamble senior executive who successfully ran several of the company's largest multi-billion, that's with a B, dollar businesses, all while transforming organizational health scores along the way. Scott is on the faculty at Indiana University's Kelley School of Business for Executive Education, where he teaches others-oriented leadership and the secret to sustaining motivation. He's been named a CEO Thought Leader by the Chief Executives Guild and a Top 50 Leadership Innovator by Inc. magazine, where he was a top columnist with over 1 million monthly readers. He's a frequent guest on many national publications and podcasts, and I'm proud to bring him back to you today to talk about his newest book, an Amazon bestseller, by the way, called Leading from the Middle, a playbook for managers to influence up, down, and across the organization. Hey, Scott, welcome back to the How Did It Happen podcast.
Terrific to be here again. You're tearing it up. I got to be a part of a movement, so I'm happy to be back.
Well, it was really it was a really big deal for me the first time I had you on, which for those of you who want to listen to that, it's episode 107, because it was the first time, Scott, that I had approached someone who had presented to Vistage. So I met you virtually on this big webinar with probably 1,000 people on it. And it was the first, I think it was maybe the first time you had to, it was a year ago.
Yeah.
A little over a year ago, first time you had to present to a group like that virtually.
That's correct. That's
people
correct.
are pretty used to now, but at that time it was like, wait a minute, this guy's going to talk into a camera for like 3 hours or whatever it was. And he pulled it off. And so I was so impressed by it. I was like, wow, I normally wouldn't contact these people, but I thought, well, why not? So yeah, it was, and I've done that several times since because, it's a lot easier for me to connect with people in all parts of the world, like you in San Diego, for example. So I owe you a thank you for, kind of breaking me out of this limiting thought that I had before I had a chance to see you the first time.
Fantastic.
So Scott's already answered the how did it happen question in episode 107. So now we're going to ask the question a little bit differently, which is, Scott, how did it happen for you in the last year?
Yeah, it's funny you bring it up, Mike. It required, like many people, a major pivot, right? Of course, I'm an author and a speaker. And when your business model is based on live events and live events go away overnight and they convert to virtual, you have to scramble in a hurry and change your business model and get with the times, or fall behind the times very, very quickly. So kind of how things have been happening for me since I saw you last was a very quick pivot to understanding what does it take to deliver a really great virtual presentation and a great virtual event. And interesting, a lot of people assume it's the same thing. Well, all you do, Scott, is you talk the same stuff and you just do it the same way. You just do it to a camera, and that is not true. There's a whole different world of having to engage people in an online environment, and a whole different bag of tricks and tips that you have to be able to develop and do. And then, oh, by the way, there's the technology aspect of it to be able to do it well. And so I've been learning an awful lot, Mike, over the last year. And I'm happy to say I'm better for the experience. Like the rest of the world, I wish this virus never hit for many, many reasons. On a professional note, looking back, I feel blessed that I was able to make the best of it. And in the end, I've expanded my menu of offerings. I now have virtual events as part of my offering. I think going forward, we're going to be in a hybrid world, right? Where we're never going to go back to the way we were. So I'm always going to need to have virtual events as part of that. And I've added training to my menu of options and more coaching and more keynotes. So, for me, it's really happened in a way I didn't expect over the last year. If you had told me even before that Vistage event that, we'd be in a world where there wouldn't be live events for a year, I would have told you were crazy. So that's what's been happening for me, pivoting hard and thankful for it, looking back on it.
And how long into it, Scott? So you presented to Vistage, and where I saw it was March or early April of 2020. And I imagine at that time you were probably thinking, like a lot of people were, a couple of months from now things will be maybe like, how long did it take you before you're like, I have to have a permanent strategy, even when I'm back in front of, large audiences on a stage or something?
Yeah, it's interesting, Mike. Look, I'm just going to be honest with you, and as I try to be in life always, I went through a period of denial where it was very painful to think that something that I'd gotten really good at, live events to thousands, was going to evaporate. And it took me, probably 2 or 3 months of going through denial phase where, like, all right, I'm just going to ride this out. This can't go on this long, right? It can't be that bad. This figuring out all the technology, setting up a studio that I have now at home, a virtual studio, is an awful lot of work. And, what if I could just ride this out? And after about 2 months of seeing my calendar completely dry up, losing over a dozen events, live events, and them telling me, hey, we'll get back to you if we're going to reschedule this at all, kind of a light went off that I better make up for lost time already. I feel like I'm 2 months behind. And it was at that point that I knew I had to move quick and hard. So, lesson learned for me, I probably could have moved even quicker than some of my compatriots did. But, I learned the lesson hard and moved on and pivoted fast from there.
And you mentioned, pardon me, earlier that, this thought that you can just stand in front of the camera and present as you normally would, isn't the way to do it. What have you actually learned, and what are you doing now differently than what you thought you were going to need to do for whatever period of time you thought it might be?
Yeah, it's a great point, Mike. And I could go on and on. I'll give you just a few examples, but there's things all the way from how you deliver a speech. And it's human nature for us when we're on a Zoom screen. I'll just give you small examples at first, right? It's human nature to do this. So right now, I'm actually looking at you on the screen, Mike. And I bet I'm not looking at your
I do that all the time. I try to look at the person and I'm not looking at the camera, right?
You're not looking at the camera. That is disaster in a keynote mode, because right now I'm literally looking you right in the eyes.
Yeah.
Now I'm looking right at the camera, and it probably feels like I'm looking at you right in the eyes, and I can barely even see you in my peripheral. So there's a skill that you have to develop, and you can't see, but out of focus right up here on my camera, I actually have a picture of an audience right next to the camera to help me feel like, okay, that's the audience that I'm addressing and, and then I'm talking to. You'll also notice that, this is a good tip for anybody that has to do a Zoom call in a work environment. And this is probably, it's different for you, Mike. I see you're sitting down at the desk, but you'll notice I'm standing up.
Yeah. We
know that now research has shown us over 55% of what we communicate, it's probably closer to 60%. Psychology research and neuroscience research has shown this. 55 to 60% of what we communicate comes from body gestures and being able to move your hands and pivot your head. And when you sit down on a desk, and you're like most people and you're talking to the camera this way, you lose an awful lot of communication. So in speaking in a virtual world, I found I can't get away with it sitting at a desk. I have to have a camera set up where I could still talk. I can pace a little bit. In some cases, I have a second camera shot. I don't have it set up here. So whereas I'm talking to you, I could hit a button and cut, you get one, like a side shot of me. Okay. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Profile shots to mix up because, looking at a screen as opposed to being there live when there's all kinds of things for your senses, that can be hard. For 90 minutes to stare at a screen and watch somebody, and then you have slides coming in, for example, as well. It's hard. I've learned a lot about backgrounds. When I give a keynote, sometimes I will stand over here and the curtains in the background will be gone. It'll just be a blue wall. And then I have a program that allows me to put the slides right here. Okay. So you see them on the screen. I'm referring to the slides like this. I'm pointing to the slides. Again, I'm not doing that today because we're just talking, you and I. Yeah. But you learn all kinds of technology things and different tricks. And that's a whole different skill set that you have to learn.
And that's a great thing you just mentioned there about the slides, because normally the slides take over the screen, right? And
right, that's right.
You're gone. Or on Zoom, you're this little tiny thing up here.
That's right.
It's really hard to, yeah, okay.
It's hard to engage, right? It's hard to engage with someone because in a real world, sometimes I'm speaking on, I've got my slides up, but they're 50 feet tall behind me and I'm on stage and you could still engage in both. And here, I don't want to become that tiny little box because you can't even see my facial expressions and it's hard to connect with people. So you learn things like that through this process. And that's kind of how I've been making it happen last year.
Makes sense. I wish I could stand when I do podcasts, but I feel like I always have to write notes. And I feel like if I was standing and trying to write notes, it would be hard. But I actually don't like to sit and do them because I want to, move around more and stuff too. But I got to figure out a way to either remember everything that everybody says and be able to pull it back out at a moment's notice or go without it and just, wing it. But I'll work on that. And looking directly at the camera, because I always want to look at the person, but I'm not looking at the person. That's something I know I do that all the time. So it's something that's a great tip because a lot of people do it because they don't understand that looking at the person is not looking at the camera.
Yeah, it's tricky. I still do it. I was just looking at you as you were talking. I still have to, and I have a picture of an audience up here, right? I still have to work at it. So it's all work, but it's all good.
So one of the things that you, in addition to doing all of that type of thing, you also wrote a new book during this time, or at least you are about to publish it. I mean, it's published. I guess it's not distributed yet till May, but and I'm really intrigued by the title because so many books get written and they're for like the leaders and the entrepreneurs, like how to be a CEO or whatever, or how I became a CEO or how I ran my business or they're usually focused on, the people that have already gotten to a spot where a lot of people aspire to get to. In your book, Leading from the Middle, a playbook for managers to influence up, down, and across the organization, which I think it's a mouthful of a subtitle, but it's a great subtitle because it basically says no matter where you are, if you're somewhere in the middle, and that middle can be pretty big, you can get something powerful from this book. So what was the reason for you to choose that audience?
Yeah, well, here's how it happened, relative to the brand of your show. For years, Mike, I've been planning to write this book, a kind of a love note to middle managers. And by the way, for your audience, the book is called Leading from the Middle. And when I say middle manager, I don't want your audience to opt out and say, well, that's not me. I'm too high in the organization or too low in the organization. A middle manager is anyone who has a boss and is a boss, and to do their job well has to influence up, down, and across the organization. So there are middle managers, lower middle managers, and upper middle managers. But even people in the C-suite that aren't quite to CEO can still be considered a middle manager because they have to manage up as part of their function, and down and across. And it creates a lot of unique dynamics. So kind of how it came about is I've been planning for years. I've been studying middle managers for over 16 years now, doing original research, and doing more surveys and interviews and original research and original studies than you can imagine. And I always had it on the back burner to write the book. And then right before the pandemic started, it started to be kind of fall into crisis mode. When I was given a keynote, if you're lucky and you're any good at giving keynotes, sometimes people clamor, for you afterwards. They want to get a chance to meet you. They want to ask you some more questions. And I was finding more and more a theme of people that were, in essence, middle managers struggling with all that they had going on in their life. How did they manage it all? And they felt like they weren't going anywhere in their organization. They weren't moving up as fast as they wanted to. They weren't creating the kind of culture that leaves an imprint on people. They weren't being the managers that they wanted to be. And I found I was reaching almost crisis mode, that it was more and more calling to me that I have to speak to this forgotten audience in the middle, the backbone of any organization, the middle manager. Once the pandemic hit, Mike, and I'm just being honest here, as I was shifting and recovering to virtual keynotes, there was a window where my phone wasn't ringing for keynotes. And I quickly said, okay, this has got to be it. This has to be the time where I take, 16 years of research and convert it into the fleshed out book that I've been working on for a while. And so within a span of about 9 months, during the pandemic, I had more time to really focus on finish out my research and create this love letter to middle managers. And the book comes out May 18th. And national bookstores across the nation, and on Amazon and all the places that you buy books. So I'm very, very, very excited about it. I think this may be my most important work yet, Mike.
Oh, okay. That's saying something, because you're at least your third book. I know that.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Yeah,
that's
okay.
right.
So Scott, what as I was listening to you there, you said, and I know you're a data junkie. I know you love data, because every one of your blog posts has a data point to it, and it's important, credibility, all that. And I just do want to remind people that from a credibility standpoint, you're not just some guy who's talking the talk and writing a book on, something he doesn't know anything about. I mean, you spent many, many years running billion-dollar divisions of Procter Gamble, full of a bunch of middle managers that were very important to your success and to the success of the division and the company. So it's not, I just want to make sure that people understand that, again, back to, if you're not a middle manager, why would you be interested in this? Well, because it's important that they perform and they know how to navigate all of these things, and that they're always, feeling like they're as important as they are.
Yeah, they're critically important in leading from the middle. I spell it out, Mike, so that can be no mistake. We know from data that the average middle manager, get ready for this one, the average middle manager accounts for, on average, about 25% of the variation of revenue in any organization, if they're not a non-for-profit. That's 3 times more than individuals that are coded as my sole job is to innovate. We also know, a 5-year study from Stanford showed that just replacing a poor middle manager with just an average middle manager boosts productivity more than if you actually added a net new person to the team. We also know that a good middle manager, if you upgrade from a poor to a good middle manager, you can increase employee retention by more than 20%, just from that one solid upgrade to a middle manager. That's how important these folks are to the organization. And they have an incredible set of unique challenges that are born from the dynamic of not only having so much going on, but having to manage up, down, and across, it creates some very, very unique challenges. Can I share one with you and your listeners that I think you might find surprising?
Yeah, go.
Yeah, most people say, okay, Scott, I got it. Middle manager, I know why the job's so hard. Look at all the stuff I got to do. I'm stuck in the middle. I got to manage up, down, across. The work never ends. I'm dying over here. I'm exhausted. For sure, that's a part of it, Mike. But here's what science is teaching us now, and this one may surprise you. Perhaps the number one reason, the most challenging thing about being a middle manager has to do with the number of hats that you have to wear as a middle manager. And it's not just because it creates so much work. It's because it creates what psychologists call micro switching roles. And these micro transitions happen all day, every day. Let me give you an example. If you're a middle manager, odds are you have to switch from a deferential stance with your boss to an authoritative stance to your employees, to a collaborative stance with your peers, sometimes all within the same meeting. Yes. Sometimes it means you have to jump into this role you weren't expecting to. I think folks that have been in corporate all have been there, done that, where they're in a meeting and their boss walks into the meeting and all of a sudden they got to change modes and say, oh, okay, my boss is in the room. I have to change into a different mode. You switch from high power roles to low power roles, from roles where you have tons of authority to no authority. And we're now learning from neuroscience that this is exhausting. It's not just the amount of work, it's the mental kind of machinations that you have to go through, the amount of micro transitions you have to make within a day creates exhaustion and self-identity problems. Middle managers wondering, well, so what is my role really? I'm bouncing around all the time, but what really is my role? And maybe that's a challenge you didn't expect, but we're seeing that in the data.
And that's, so as you were, this micro switching, I thought about multitasking as sort of similar, right? There's a lot of studies now, and I can't cite them like you can, but there's a lot of studies now that say, people who think they're multitasking are just, kidding themselves. There are very, very few people who can do that reliably and well over any period of time, let alone long periods of time. But a lot of us sort of value our worth at how good we think we are at doing that, right? How fast I can respond to the email, how fast I can respond to the text, or how fast I can give an answer that I haven't really thought through, but at least I'm fast with it, that kind of thing.
That's 100% right, Mike. And in truth, what we now know, and any neuroscientist worth their salt will tell you this, on average, hold on to your hat for this one, on average, you actually lose 40% of your productivity when you are you're attempting to kind of parallel path like you're describing when you're trying to do that. What the brain, here's what happens, what we're really good at, we think that we can, kind of multitask. What the brain is really good at is, it's related to what I was talking about, is this task switching. It can change back and forth with astonishing speed, but it creates the illusion of productivity because you think you move from focusing on one thing to the next thing. And while your brain can switch that fast back and forth, it doesn't retain anything of what it's trying to retain. This is why anybody that works in a manufacturing facility, what anyone who runs an assembly line will tell you is, you want to run products on that line as long as you can. When you have to shut down the line and change over to a new line, that slows down productivity. You have to get the belts going back again, and that's why you try to run the lines as fast as you can without switching. Yeah. It's no different with this multitasking. We think we can change assembly lines just like that without any cost, and it's just not true. It's just not true.
And you, those stats you mentioned were remarkable. The 25% of performance variation, and just from going from a poor manager to good, you said. So, and I'd like to talk to you, have you talk a little bit more about that, because there are so many. There's like inertia that comes with having a team of managers, even if they're not, just complete asses, right? You're kind of like, well, I'm going to hang on to that person because I don't want to lose that person. And so many times we've all had this happen. We lose someone who we thought was, but doing the job good. And then you replace them with someone and you're like, oh my gosh, I held on to that person for years thinking that they were good. And it turns out the person that I have now blows that person away, performance wise, culture wise, all of these things. But you said to go from poor to good was like, I forget what you said, 20% better. I forget.
Oh,
But
yeah, yeah. No. It's like it's more
that's not
productive
changing
than
that's
adding
not
a net new
changing
person.
anything else. That's
Right.
just changing the person.
That's right. That's right. Because and it makes sense when you think about it. That's the equivalent of adding a net new person to the team, because people in the middle are by default, they're going to have the most experience, right? They're going to have been around the block the most often, and they already know how to work the system. And when you can upgrade just in that role, that's why there's, my book, Leading from the Middle, that's why I think of it as a love letter to the backbone of the organization. It's like what you opened with, Mike. It's so easy to write a book about CEOs and what to do to get to the CEO by tomorrow, or all the way on to the other end, if you want to be an entrepreneur and just blow off corporate America,
Yeah.
or if you're a new hire, how do you get up to a fast start? We've forgotten this band of heroes in the middle. And I think that's why, and I say this with all humility in the world, I think that's why, even though the book comes out May 18th, it's already a number one bestseller on Amazon in management science, because no one's speaking to this band of how to help these middle managers and the unique challenges they face. And I did come prepared to share a few tips on that front as well. I can't just leave your listeners with all problems of being middle managers.
So let me ask a question that might get to that. So you define middle managers as anyone who is a boss and has a boss, right? So how does one become skilled at influencing up, down, and across? Because I think to myself, wow, that's a lot, although it's a big ask. Yeah. So how do you walk us through it? What are your thoughts? How does it happen?
Yeah. I'll give you some thoughts. First, I'll address the problem that I brought up, right? I brought up this challenge of self-identity, and what do you do when you have so many hats, and oh my God, you feel burned out and you have to change stances all the time. What I found in research with over 3,000 successful middle managers was, first of all, from a mindset standpoint, mindset standpoint, a lot of them, I would say probably 80% of them have found a way to mentally reframe their role. And they don't look at it as 100 different hats that are not connected at all. They look at, first of all, a couple of reframes. They see the 100 jobs that they have to do all belong to one job that they are uniquely suited to do. It takes special skills to be a middle manager. You should take pride in it, because only successful middle managers are capable of viewing these 100 jobs as one integrated job. That's the very nature of your job, is to be able to switch around back and forth very quickly. I've heard some powerful reframes. Like this one was so powerful, it made it into the book. I was talking to a very successful middle manager in upstate Minnesota, I think it was, from my research. And he was telling me, well, Scott, here's the way I think of my role. My job is to think like an engineer, but feel like an artist. And that's how I approach the entire realm of being a middle manager. And it makes sense when you think about it, that being in the middle, you have to have a very process-oriented, very procedural mindset to get things done. But at the same time, you have to have empathy, because you're at the intersection of the horizontal and vertical in the company, of all the information flow and all the emotional flow. You're the one that can affect the mood of your boss. You're the one that can make your employees feel self-confident. You're the one that can give boosts to your peers. So you're in the middle as this emotional, stoic rock. And so, I always thought that think like an engineer, feel like an artist was genius. That's just, the book is packed with overall mindset tips. But I want to get to your specific question now, Mike, on, okay, so how do I lead up, down, and across? Of course, the book chapter by chapter goes through how to do that. I'm going to give you just one tip for how to lead up effectively, how to lead down, and how to lead across in the time we have. So I'll proceed with that with your permission. Yeah, does that sound good?
Yes.
Leading up, I'm going to base each one of these on the most common questions I get, or what the data is screaming at me. So leading your boss is a big, hairy thing, right? And I have a ton of data and examples in the book, Leading from the Middle, on how to do this. Here's one that's maybe the most important of them all. Get ready for this one. We found, now I'm up to almost a study of 300 boss-subordinate pairings. We studied them and their relationships. And we have found We're well past 80% of them now. Over 80% of those boss subordinate relationships, we discovered material breaches in basic understanding of expectations, despite the fact that the employee, before we started the work, said, "You clear on what your boss wants?" And they would say, "Yeah." And we'd ask the boss, "Are you sure your employee understands what you want, what's expected of you?" And they would say, "Yeah." "Yeah, well, we found in over 80% of the cases that was not true. They weren't matching up." And lines up with what Gallup teaches us as well. Gallup data will show you that half of all employees in the United States and around the globe have no idea of what is expected of them at work. So you can't lead up effectively with your boss if you don't start by challenging a very core assumption, which is don't assume you're as clear as you think you are on what's expected of you. And I talk about a very important tool called the good to great grid, which is, it's as simple as this, Mike. Sit down with your boss and say, "Okay, let's say you're working on leadership. Boss, tell me what good leadership looks like." Let's literally write down the definition. Great. Now tell me what great leadership looks like. And what happens is you force specificity, because research shows on average, when you set expectations, most of us, it's a very lazy endeavor. We stay broad, we don't get specific enough, and then what happens, the employees interpret things that they want out of that. So you have to, really sit down and get crystal clear on the expectations as step number one of managing up effectively. Does this make sense before I move, to the tip on managing down?
Yeah, I'd kind of like an example of that. Like, how would you walk somebody through that good to great grid?
Yeah, and I have, in fact, I'm going to offer up a toolkit at the end of this where people can see an example of a completed good to great grid. But literally, imagine a grid, and on one column it says good, the other column it says great, and then on the far side of the column, you just have different things that are important to you at work: leadership, initiative, follow through. And then you literally go through cell by cell and say, "Okay, boss, let's move on to initiative. When I take initiative, like, what to you is good?" And then you sit down and you write down, an example. I'll give you a very specific example.
Be a data point. The example would be a data point. Like, my initiative means, okay.
Or a metaphor. Here's an example.
Yeah.
On a good to great grid chart that I filled out with a team, we wanted to get really clear on good priority setting and great priority setting. So for good priority setting, we agreed as a team to a definition that I call trash compactor management. That means, a trash compactor is a machine that literally squeezes down trash into a smaller cube. Imagine if you thought of your work that way. And you said, "I'm going to start saying no to some things, so the size of the cube of work that I work on gets squished down." That's pretty good, because frankly, Mike, most of us aren't very good at saying no to new stuff. It just keeps piling up and our cube of work gets bigger. So we agreed that good priority setting was trash compactor management. But then we said great priority setting is accordion management. Accordion is an instrument, a musical instrument that you play like this, in and out.
Yeah.
Imagine if you thought of your workload that way, that, okay, at some points I understand we have to expand the workload. We've got a big customer call coming up. We've got a big meeting with the CEO. Everyone's going to have to work more hours. Okay, we got to add priorities on. But you can't keep expanding the accordion, Mike. You're going to burn everybody out. So you contract. And in quieter times, you rest, you recuperate, you celebrate, you engage in learning opportunities for personal growth. You do less, you take on less, and then you expand again, and then you contract. So we decided that was great priority setting. And what I always tell folks when I walk them through examples like this is, it doesn't even matter if you agree with those definitions. I almost prefer that you don't, because what's really important is that you understand the whole that exists in setting expectations. And you use a simple tool like this good to great grid to spell out your own definitions that are important to you and your boss, right? Does that make sense?
That makes sense, yeah. How do you get through in that type of a discussion? So it's one thing to have that type of discussion, and then you say you get away, you go off and you're working, right? And there comes a point where you think, okay, I need to say no to this, not in a trash compactor way, but in an accordion way, but I still need to say no or not yet or something like that. How do you, and that's easy to say if you're going down. I'm not saying that it's the right thing, but it's easy, right? No, to if you're going down. But when you're going up, or across, how do you recommend that people navigate that?
I use what I call the Bermuda Triangle of bargaining. And here's what that means. You know the old, well, I guess it's kind of an old, I don't know if it's a wives' tale or the old story, the Bermuda Triangle, right? Everything that goes into it disappears. They disappear. And if you think of work works in a triangle, and guess what happens? You just keep getting work added on, and any hope, any semblance of prioritization disappears into this triangle the more and more people ask you. So you have to think of a different triangle. What I call the Bermuda Triangle of bargaining, and it has 3 points on the triangle. Imagine a triangle here. If I had a slide, Mike, of course you've learned today that I'd be over here talking to you and pointing to the slide, but we're not going to do that. So imagine there's a triangle. You've got time, you've got scope, and you've got resources. Those are the 3 variables that you can push and pull back on, right? And you could say, okay, I understand you want this work done. Give me more time. I understand you want this work done. How about we reduce the scope because I can't get to all of that? I understand you want this work done. How about giving me some more resources? And if that still doesn't work, you still have the authority to give a different yes, which is, yes, I hear you. I know that you want that work done. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have somebody else on the team do this because of this reason. And because if I take that on, other things are going to drop and that's not going to be good. So you're giving a different yes to the request. So those are a couple of tips that I normally give people where they face that situation.
Okay. And you would recommend, I'm assuming, that they do that right away, not the day before it's due. Like you sort of you've accepted it, but then even knowing you couldn't do it, and then the day before or the day after, you're like, yeah, I didn't get to, yeah.
That's right. Then it comes across as an excuse and it's too late.
Right. Okay. So let's shift to leading down. You were about to go there before I.
Yeah, no worries. So now leading down, what does that mean? Well, that means if you have employees that report to you. And in case if your audience is thinking, okay, well, that's great, Scott, but I'm not a boss yet. I'm not a manager of others. What I've found is, especially in today's work world, we are promoting people faster and faster than ever. For millennials, it's a key signpost, as a sign of progress. So, data shows us that on average, we are starting to use titles and progression up a food chain as a major part of inspiration for people. So even if you aren't a manager of others yet, there's a darn good chance prior to prior generations, you will be sooner than you think you are. And you may as well build those skills now. I'm going to answer this in the most common question I get. There's so much in Leading from the Middle, my new book, that talks about how to manage down. I'm going to focus on the biggest question that I get is, okay, I've made it. I have people reporting to me now. How do I give them feedback? I'm terrified of that. I think I'm going to screw it up. And, the truth is, most of us, Mike, we're not wired for giving feedback well. We just aren't, especially not the people that work for us. There's a whole host of problems that we get into that I talk about leading from the middle. I'm going to give you the no miss 6 quick tips that you got to do to give feedback. Great. Right off the top of my head, you got to be specific, right? My grandpa used to tell me that white bread ain't nutritious. Think of feedback the same way. When you give white bread feedback, it's bland and generic. That doesn't help anybody. You got to give whole wheat feedback, specific, granular, nutritious. Otherwise, it does nobody any good. So you got to be specific. You got to be sincere. If it comes from the heart, it sticks in the mind. You got to be calibrating, meaning you got to let people know when you give them the feedback, you got to give them context. So let's say, Mike, you and I were working on you standing up. We were talking about this earlier, right? Yeah. So I tell you, hey, Mike, you got to stand up more in your podcasts. And, then I have to put context on it and say, but Mike, most podcast hosts sit down. That's very natural for the state that you're in right now. So don't worry about that. Just let's work on it together over time, right? Or I've got to say, Mike, you don't get it. Every podcast host but you is standing up to deliver their podcast. You got to catch up. Right? Those are different contexts that I just gave you. So you have to be calibrating, because otherwise what will happen, I promise you, the employee will take it to the worst possible scenario and make the worst out of it.
You put me on the defensive. You put me on the
absolutely
defensive. The second one, the first one, you didn't.
Yeah, and they'll take it to the worst place possible. So you got to be calibrating. A couple of tips: you got to be proportionate. Guess what? We generally do more good things than bad things, and we now know research is showing us this is super clear. The best ratio is 5 to 1. For every one piece of corrective feedback you're going to give 5 pieces of supporting feedback. That seems to be the sweet spot for most people to still be able to consume the corrective feedback and be able to do something with it well. And then you also got to be timely, right? After the fact feedback is matter of fact feedback, and you got to be tailored. You got to tell it to people in the way that they want to hear it. My experience, Mike, has been there's 3 kinds of people in the world. The first kind of people want to receive feedback. Just give me the bad stuff first, right now, or I can't enjoy anything else. That's me, right? Hit me hard, then I can enjoy the good stuff. The second kind of people in the world are the people that want the compliment sandwich. Wow, Mike, give me some love, then give me the hard stuff, then round it out with another bun of, compliments, the compliment sandwich.
Sure,
and,
sure.
it's true. And then the third kind of people in this world are the ones that say they want that first kind, but they really want the second kind. They want the compliment sandwich. The key is to just know your people and how they want to receive it. And so there's some power tips for managing down through great feedback.
And I appreciate you giving those tips, because all of those things, I find that a lot of people struggle not only with giving the feedback, but they've heard of the compliment sandwich. They just don't know how to give it, right? It's kind of like the compliment sandwich it sometimes can come off where the compliment is, the person is like, it doesn't really feel like a compliment. And the critique is like, man, where did that come from? No one ever said that to me before. And then there's something at the end, they're not even listening anymore to the compliment at the end, the other part of the.
That's right. Because they're focused on, oh, my boss just bashed me. What do I do about it? Right. It's 2 different things. Yeah.
Right. Do you mind if I shift gears for a second?
By all means.
So you have you have a daily email, or not daily. It's like twice a week. Is it?
Well, yeah, it's Lead On. You're talking. It's weekly. It just launched. It's the newsletter on LinkedIn.
Yeah. So, but you had something before, but that's what I'm referring to as this sort of lead on thing. And I just got it the other day, maybe yesterday. I don't know. I think it was yesterday morning. And so I was like, oh, this is kind of neat. So I saved it because I wanted to read it so I could talk to you about it if it meant something to me, and it did. And because in there you talked about imperfections and implementations, and what I liked about it is you had it's sort of a bite-size summary, and then, as is everything with you, Scott, if you want more data, hit the thing and you go to your blog post with more data or something. But I was hoping you could take us through I guess the key tool in this was the 50-50 rule about making decisions. And I find that everybody struggles with this, but it's one of the things that I think really holds back managers at all levels, is understanding how to make a decision that keeps things moving forward.
Yeah, I can help with that. So first, I'll just kind of set up. You're referring to a brand new newsletter, a new form of free content that any of your listeners can get. It's called Lead On. It's about leading yourself and others brilliantly, and it's a short read format. Each week, I provide one insight, one implementation, excuse me, and one imperfection. In other words, one crisp insight based on data, one imperfection, a mistake that I've made as a leader, and then one implementation, one tool, strategy, or tip that you can use to help you lead yourself or others brilliantly. And what you're referring to, if folks want it, they can find it on LinkedIn and subscribe to it. Or if they go to scottmautz.com, you'll find my blog where you can sign up for Lead On in my longer form blog. And what you're talking about is a rule that I talk about called the 50-50 rule. That is actually something I also talk about leading from the middle, because it's particularly powerful for middle managers. And here's what it is. It's about helping, we hear so often of how easily we get overwhelmed at work, especially middle managers. It's difficult to make decisions. It's difficult to focus on anything. Everyone else is urgent becomes you're urgent.
Yeah.
How do you get out of that cycle? And we have found the 50-50 rule is incredibly powerful. Here's what it says. It says, when things are craziest for you, when so much is coming at you, spend 50% of your time on pragmatism and 50% of your time on possibilities. Here's what that means, and here's what that does. If you spend 50% of your time, you're like, okay, things are coming into, I can barely keep my head above water. Everyone else is urgent. It's become my urgent. What do I focus on? Boom, draw a line in the sand. 50% of your time is pragmatism. Okay, I'm only going to allot half of my time to getting stuff done here. So what am I going to do? Okay, that forces me to prioritize. I'm not going to take that on. I'm going to take this on. I'm going to put them in this order. Be pragmatic. But what we know from research is when we're busiest, what happens is we forget about possibilities and opportunities. We spend all our time bouncing from thing to thing, trying to cross off things on our to-do list because that feels good. We spend time from, oh, my boss said this is due tomorrow. Oh, my peers need this from me. And we spend our time flying all around, and we miss the possibilities and the opportunities that are present in our life all around us. And so what happens is when you spend 50% of your time on pragmatism, 50% of your time on committing to, I'm going to say no to some things so I can spend some time on seeing, opportunities. 50 plus 50 equals 100, which means you have zero time left to screw around being indecisive. You have zero time left to focus on things that aren't going to help you and move you and your ship forward. You're forced to be pragmatic. You're forced to not miss opportunities on the table. Incredibly powerful rule, psychology-based that I try to prescribe to everybody. Does that make sense, Mike?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how do I categorize the pragmatic part of it? Because it seems to me like bucket and scheduling is what I heard from you. So, we've heard people talk about, you've got urgent, important, and these other sort of designations. But as I was listening to you, I wanted to get some clarity from you on how you think about that, but also on the possibilities that made me think about calendar, right? Because if you don't make time for possibilities, you don't get to possibilities because the pragmatic or what you make pragmatic always take over. There's never time to squeeze in. Like, I'm going to squeeze in some possibility time when I see an opening. Well, that opening is hard to see sometimes, right?
Especially when you're busy, right?
Yeah. So how do you, just from a tactical standpoint, how do you coach that? How do you think about it?
Yeah, I could give you I'll give you two real quick examples because, underneath pragmatism and possibility, now there's a host of tools, right? For each one's,
Okay.
each bucket that I didn't even get into. But if you look at pragmatism, that's really about, and you're right on top of it, Mike, that's about committing to being far more productive than you currently are now. And if you cut your time in half and say 50% of my time is going to be spent on being pragmatic, I got to be a lot more productive. Now you're going to start to experiment with different ways to become more productive. This is where productivity tools can come into play for you. And you have to commit to trying different productivity tools to enhance your productivity. Perfect example. I started with a 50-50 mindset, and I teach this, and my 50% pragmatism bucket led me to practicing the Pomodoro technique. It's a technique within the productivity pool that's very powerful for somebody like me. And I'll just give you an example, right? And this is just one of many productivity tips that I talk about and write about. The Pomodoro technique is very powerful, especially for someone like me who has to produce a lot of written content, but it has many applications, okay? But what that is you take you can use a kitchen timer and you set it for 25 minutes. And then you work without disruption. For me, it's writing. I write for 25 minutes. Ding, the kitchen timer goes off. You get up, 5 minutes, you walk away from your work and you don't think about it. You don't look at your email. You don't do anything. You get a glass of water. You walk around the house, whatever you have to do. You clear your head for 5 minutes. You come back again. 25 minutes. You set the timer. Back and forth. This has been proven. I know that Navy fighter pilots use this as a technique to help them stay more focused in their training. When they're training to learn how to fly these F-15 ginormous planes, and I found that to be incredibly productive to help me be more pragmatic and focused in my time. And that's just one productivity tool, right? So now you go to the other 50%. So okay, I hear you, Scott, but how do I find time to look at possibilities in the midst of all this chaos? Well, that's where it comes down to having really super clear goals and a very clear vision for where you want your business to go. A lot of times a proxy for possibility is going back to the vision of what you're trying to accomplish on your business. And rather getting caught in the thing of the moment, someone else is urgent, you stop and say, okay, now's a slice of time where I'm going to go back and revisit our goals, our objectives, our vision. Is anything being thrown at me right now going to help us progress in any of those things? A lot of times, Mike, we'll write a vision, we'll stick it in a cupboard, and we won't look at it again for another year until it's the next year's annual vision setting ceremony. And it's not just vision, it's the goals that we set, it's the objectives that we have, it's the processes and procedures that we spell out that we have to follow through. And when you revisit all that kind of stuff, it allows you to be clearer and more in tune with possibilities, as does spending more time externally focused. Part of my 50% possibility also has to do with reading what competitors are doing competitive analysis, getting outside of my own head and the old, priorities of the day to spend time on spotting possibilities. So you can train yourself to get better at both.
And do you use that 25-5 on both sides of the equation then? You use that for pragmatic stuff and you use that for possibility stuff as well?
You absolutely can, because it's a productivity tool that cuts across. That's just for any work that you have to do. I happen to put it in the pragmatic bucket because that's kind of where it belongs to, as a productivity tip. But yeah, you absolutely can. Well,
that's really great information, because I think I find that in a lot of companies that people condition themselves, or they've been conditioned that if I don't respond to somebody in 10 minutes, I'm going to lose my job, or they're going to think I'm not working or whatever. And I get that. And there are some people that expect that, and I don't know why, but there are some people that expect that. And there are some roles where you just have to do that, at least for a period of time during the day. If you're in client service or something, you have to answer the phones, But a lot of people, I found in my experience, they're afraid to carve out. They don't know how to focus for 25 minutes.
That's true.
They don't, and it's scary, right? Because if I have to focus for 25 minutes, that means I have to get productive, Scott. And if I can instead pretend I'm going to focus and instead keep my phone up so that if it texts or rings or my email notification goes off, which is another thing you should get rid of, my email notification goes up, I'm needed, I'm valuable, and it keeps me from really doing what you said, just being productive. If you spend 2 half-hour points in a day, for example, on that 25-5, it feels to me like if you're really guarded on that, first of all, nobody's going to miss you for that hour. And second, you are going to get more done in that hour than you would have gotten done all day. And you still have the rest of the day to deal with all of those other things.
That's right, Mike. And what I want to make sure your listeners take away is science has done the heavy lifting for you here. You notice I said 25-5. Notice I didn't say 95 or 65. People say, well, I can't work that long. Well, we know that science has now shown the optimal quantity of time where you can work without focus. If you're committed to it, specifically is 25 minutes, then take a break. Check your email notification, whatever you need to do, and then go back and lock in again for 25 minutes, because we know past that, human nature kicks in and it's very difficult to maintain intense scrutiny and focus. Right. So there's really no excuse anybody can focus for 25 minutes at a time, right? Especially if you're giving yourself a 5-minute break. That's why I find it to be such a powerful tool.
Scott, how do you everything is full of research and data. How do you do it? How do you do the research? You mentioned talking to this person in Minnesota and whatever, but you're busy too. How do you do good research so that everything that you're creating, you can back up, which you always can, with resources? Like you don't have to take my word for this. You can research it, here, which is that adds a lot of credibility to what people think and what they're telling people to consider doing.
Well, I appreciate that, Mike. I try to bring that data out to stage too whenever I do a keynote and to all my books. And the answer is you have to be committed to it as a strategy, and it's also very, very interesting work to me, and it inspires me because I find truth that you can't find just through experience. And of course, I bring my experience to the table. Of course, we all do that. But so, I spend an awful lot of time in conducting original research. There are firms that I can hire where I go to them with a hypothesis and I say, I'm trying to prove or disprove this based on my experience. Is it true or is it not true? And you can hire teams of researchers to go out and do that. I also have, I'm very blessed and able to be on faculty at Indiana University's Kelley School of Business. I teach in their executive education program. And every time I conduct a class, it's like a living learning lab. I'm always doing surveying, questioning, asking. I'm always doing, there's a lot of online survey tools that you can use as a researcher. There's just so many vehicles. I spend more time looking up original. I've gotten very good at mining the depths of the information available on the internet now through contacts that I have that I know this is where you find academic paperwork on this topic. And it's just part of how I do things, Mike. It's some people enjoy scrolling through Twitter in the morning and, reading the morning news. And I'll do that for about 2 minutes. And then I'm deep into research again. And I'm always going through the latest publications that are out there or conducting my own original research through interviews, surveys, and vehicles that I pay to use or through classes that I teach. So, okay. Yeah, it's all about commitment.
Well, from my experience, whether it's your books or whether it's your newsletter, your blog, if you want to short circuit, one, doing research, or two, trying to figure out on your own what you should be doing either as a leader or a manager, going to your stuff is just phenomenal. So,
I appreciate that. I try to be the intersection of insight from research and experience. That's what I try. So I appreciate that. You appreciate that. Thank you.
So you mentioned earlier, Scott, that you have a special offer that you want to make. What's that all about?
Oh yeah. Just I put it together for your listeners, and if they go to the book Leading from the Middle is coming out May 18th, and I'm very blessed that it's already hit #1 on Amazon in management science. And I want your readers to be able to access that. And so if they go to scottmautz.com. And they do scottmautz.com, that's SCOTTMAUTZ.com /free tools, no spaces in between that, scottmautz.com /free tools. They will be able to download a 30-page companion workbook that goes along with Leading from the Middle. And what we found, not surprisingly from research, is that for some of us, we process, learn, and can hold and retain information much better when we're able to fill in the blank, to do multiple choice, to engage with the material beyond just reading it. So this is a 30-page, 80-question companion workbook that goes along with Leading from the Middle. And then it also gives your listeners access to my free leadership and self-leadership toolkit to engage in more data, insight-driven, and personal experience-based flavored content for your readers and for your listeners.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
You bet.
So what do you want to leave us with here, Scott? Besides, getting the book, which everyone should do, is get the book, and they should follow Scott as well and subscribe to his newsletter and read the blog. What else do you want to leave people, whether they're middle managers or whether they're, at the top or whatever, based on all the work that you've done and all the success that you've had, helping people create better organizations?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. I want to go back to your brand, Mike. How did it happen? And I want to share with folks, this thought. And this isn't about the new book, Leading from the Middle. This is about experience in life and what I'm encouraging people now in my writing to think about. Someday you're going to look back on this incredible pandemic that we've been through, and in our own way, we're going to ask you, well, how did it happen? How did it come about? And how did we happen to get through that alive? Yeah. Right? That's pretty natural. And, knock on wood, but it appears the world is heading towards a phase, certainly in the United States at least, where we're going to start seeing light at the end of the tunnel. We're now getting 3 million to 4 million people a day getting vaccinated. And before you know it, and I don't mean to belittle any of the problems that have come up or any of the losses that we've had from this pandemic. It is unforgettable in our lifetime. But there is a window emerging where it's an inflection point. We're pretty soon in the, not so distant future, we're going to have the pandemic on the other side of us. And it's a perfect time, an inflection point for you to stop and say, how did it happen in my life that at this point, things started to change for the better for me? I want people to be able to look back and say, the pandemic is about to go away, and with it, old habits that I want to leave behind as well. It's the perfect time. We know that habits change when people change the environment around them and when they work hard and they practice at it, right? Because changing habits is very, very difficult, but you have to have a major reason to be able to do it. Right. And coming out of this pandemic, I encourage people to say, okay, this is the inflection point. Whatever that thing is in your life, Mike, that you wanted to do, whatever that thing is in your life that we're holding your listeners back, this is the perfect time to say, I'm going to look back and remember how I made this new phase of my life happen. It's that moment that I decided to do X, to stop being afraid of Y, to stop making assumptions Z. And we know that assumptions lead to beliefs, and beliefs lead to convictions, and convictions lead us to a smaller world. So use the moment right now to look back and say, yeah, I remember how it happened and I entered this better phase of my life, because it's the perfect time to do it.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. That's phenomenal to leave us with, Scott. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming back on the show. Thanks for writing this book. And I really appreciated the conversation today. I appreciate you sharing, and you're making a big difference.
Thanks so much. And thanks for what you're doing, Mike. Love your show. Keep it rolling.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the How'd It Happen podcast, where we believe that success doesn't happen unless you make it happen. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. And while you're there, please rate it and leave a comment as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the show, ideas for future guests, or whatever you'd like to share. And of course, you can always find me at MikeMalatesta.com. See you next time. Thanks again for listening to the How'd It Happen podcast.